Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Connecticut Compost Alliance, I'd like to welcome you to the first in-person Connecticut Compost Conference. Thank you for joining us here today at Connecticut College. This event actually was scheduled to take place at CCSU 4 years ago, but COVID had other plans for us. About 6 years ago, I was able to attend the Rhode Island Compost Conference for the first time, and I thought, how great would it be if Connecticut could have something like this? And so I reached out to my Connecticut Deep contacts who said, you should contact Cheryl Baldwin, and that's what I did. Cheryl, you want to give a little wave? She willingly signed up for she didn't know what. And so together, we pulled together some compost advocates, started meeting virtually during COVID, and formed what now is the Connecticut Compost Alliance. So Dawn, Domingo, Corey, Janice, Cynthia, Jim, Jeremy, Chelsea, Cheryl, and I became that alliance, and we appreciate them for that. We are a representation of state, federal, nonprofit, universities, private businesses coming together, representing different scales, all for the common interest of compost. While our faces have changed over the years with new members joining and previous members moving out of state with new careers, the Alliance remains focused on our mission, and that is a group of aerobic composting enthusiasts representing a diverse group of stakeholders working together to coordinate opportunities that focus on supporting and educating current and future composters to learn, network, and engage by enhancing and improving our soils. Ironically, and definitely not intentionally, Rhode Island hosts their compost conference today, and so I'm pleased to see that you all agree that we should have our own compost conference here in Connecticut. Today, of course, would not be possible without all of you, as well as our planning committee. So I would like to ask Compost Alliance members who are in the room to please stand. I'd like to take a minute to recognize them. Thank you, Cheryl, Dawn, Janice, Tim, Derek, Julie, Sarah, Mary, Bailey, and Domingo for making this conference possible. Through the Connecticut Soil Health Program, Connecticut RC&D staff has been able to administer this conference, and I'd like to recognize my colleague who's floating around with the camera today, Sarah Layton, for all her hard work. And I'm Amanda Fargo Johnson. I'm the Ag Program Director at Connecticut RC&D. Anytime through the day, if you need something, you can come see Sarah or myself. We appreciate Connecticut College and Sustainable CT for them being our supporting partners for this event. We also appreciate all our conference sponsors, many of which are outside those doors as exhibitors, so please stop by and see them today. Just a couple quick housekeeping notes for you. For those of you who signed up for an electric copy of the program, right outside the door where the schedule is, there's a QR code. You can scan that and it'll take you right to the electronic program. If you opted for a paper program and didn't grab it when you registered, that's available up front at our registration table. We have a very full day of wonderful speakers all across the U.S. They've come here to educate about compost, and in order to maximize our day, we will be starting our breakout sessions promptly. We do have one change that I want to flag for you. In our farm and mid-scale track today, on-farm composting with your community, which was originally scheduled for 10:15, has been moved to 2:15, and livestock manure management and compost quality and use with many feedstocks, which was the 2:15, is now the 10:15. So that's our only change for the day. As posted, we are filming and photographing this event, so please take note. We really would encourage you all. We want to hear how your day went. So at the back of the room, Julie, if you want to wave, there's a poster behind Julie, and there's a QR code you can scan after the conference. We ask you to please take that Google survey. And in appreciation, Jean from Cornell has brought us 2 copies of the Compost Handbook. And so if you take that survey, you have a chance to win one of 2 copies. Lastly, if you're interested in learning more about our alliance, you can visit us at ctcompostalliance.org. We also have a sign up at registration if you would like to get on our listserv. So with that, I would like to introduce Dawn Pettinelli of UConn to say a few words on behalf of our host, Connecticut College, and I hope you all enjoy your day.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm glad to see there's so many people here. Actually, I'm amazed to find out we had over 230 people sign up for this conference. That was just much more than we anticipated. So we are here today because of Dr. Eric Vukisevich. And it was funny because when we started to have this conference, we had the idea of this. We were looking for a place to hold it, and we didn't have any money, so we were looking for a place to hold it for free. So Dr. Vukisevich I run the UConn, I should introduce myself. I run the University of Connecticut Soil Testing Lab, and he had sent me some samples. So just on a lark, I sent him an email and said, hi, we're thinking of having a compost conference. Is there any chance Conn College would be willing to host it? Because we needed a sponsor. And he said yes. So he is not here, unfortunately. He's in the Pacific Northwest right now. But he did leave me this statement, which I wanted to read to you, that I thought it's actually pretty funny. So he says, Connecticut College is excited to be the woodchip base upon which this enthusiastic community of organisms can begin to digest the complex substrates of our society. It is our hope that you find your niche here among friends and neighbors, perhaps gnawing on some of the more recalcitrant materials or upcycling labile nutrient sources to use as fuel to power our soils for years to come. We invite you to feel at home here in this cozy window of land managers, enthusiasts, policy experts, zealots, academics, actinomycetes, and pillbugs. Never before has this particular group been in the same place at the same time, and we are looking forward to the collaboration and energy. We hope that you enjoy a day of learning, sharing, and getting excited about compost and getting to know each other. We have incredible events, catering, and custodial staff here at Conn College, and would like to say thank you for making this day not only happen, but be comfortable, organized, and delicious. So enjoy the day. So I'd also like to say thank you to Marilyn Burridge. She has just done an incredible job helping us coordinate this event. And lastly, I have Conn College's land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the land we currently occupy and honor the Native peoples who were its first inhabitants. Specifically, we honor the Mashantucket Pequots, the Eastern Pequots, Mohegans, and other Native nations who are indigenous to Namiag, now called New London, and the land surrounding coastal Algonquin, also known as the Long Island Sound region. We acknowledge that indigenous peoples have cared for this land over many generations and know that they endured suffering and violence through historical period of settler colonialism and its legacy. Today we strive to tell and retell the complete stories, to repair the harm, and to live together as neighbors in this region. So that's from Eric and the college. And then I would like to introduce Dorothy Pizak from Sustainable CT. We really could not have done this without your fundraising efforts through Sustainable CT. So I really thank everybody who has donated to make this conference free and possible, and I hope you learn a lot and meet good people and enjoy the day.
Good morning, everybody. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm so excited to be here today representing Sustainable CT in our Community Match Fund program. We're really excited and pleased to support this event along with 70 of you individual donors that helped make this possible. For those of you who don't know, Sustainable CT is a voluntary municipal certification program created in partnership with all 169 of Connecticut's municipalities. We seek to inspire, support, and celebrate municipalities as they work to make Connecticut a better and more sustainable place to live. We think of sustainability really broadly. Our program is rooted in equity. We have 12 really broad categories, including actions in arts and culture, economic development, affordable housing, homelessness prevention, as well as categories that you likely think of when you think of sustainability, such as well-stewarded lands and natural resources, materials management, renewable and efficient energy, and of course, compost. Currently, 133 municipalities are registered in our program, which is over 80% of the state's municipalities. So it's likely that you all live in one of our registered communities. And of those registered, 58 are currently certified, including the town in which we're gathered in today, the city of New London, which was certified bronze in 2022. So shout out New London. In addition to our certification program, in 2019, we launched our Community Match Fund program with the idea of bringing dollars to our registered communities for sustainability projects. Currently, through that time, we've seen over $3.8 million invested in these communities, half of which is coming from people like you who see projects that they want to see come to life in their communities and donate towards them, and then we match those donations. So for a little more context, the Community Match Fund is a crowdfunding grant matching program where community leaders, such as municipal officials, nonprofits, grassroots groups like the Alliance, or even residents can come to us with an idea that they have to make their community more sustainable. And if that project idea fits within our action framework, we set our project leaders up with a crowdfunding coach, and then we match dollar for dollar what they raise, up to $7,500, so for a project of $15,000. For projects that are related to greenhouse gas reductions or climate change, we actually have a higher match, up to $15,000 for projects up to $30,000. And we've supported projects all across the sustainability spectrum, including projects that address arts and culture, renewable and efficient energy, equity and inclusion, open space improvement, conservation, and of course, compost, food waste, prevention, and diversion projects. So if you're interested at all in learning more about any of our programs, including if your town is registered or certified, how to get involved in that process, or if you're interested in running your own Community Match Fund project, please come visit us at our table. Myself and Torin are here to talk to you. And yeah, lastly, I just want to acknowledge Amanda and Sarah and the rest of the CT Compost Alliance team for all the work that they've done to make today possible. They've put together a really interesting set of tracks and speaker lineup for us that really speaks to the power that compost has, not only in our personal lives and professional lives, but also in our lives as members of a larger community. So thank you all, and I'll turn it back over.
Good morning. Whoa. Woke you up, didn't it? So my name is Cheryl Baldwin. I'm with Connecticut Deep. I want to say thank you for coming. And while it's been said before, there are over 200 composters in this room. And I just want to add, it's about time. So thank you for coming today. As Amanda shared, we've been working towards this for many years, recognizing that residents, municipalities, businesses, and others needed and wanted to learn more about composting. And I hope this will be the first of many opportunities. And we are lucky, because for the first time out, we have somebody from the U.S. Composting Council. If you're not aware, they have state chapters, and currently, Connecticut doesn't have one. But there is a group that's looking to try to set up a chapter in Connecticut. And if you'll see the lovely striped t-shirt shirt woman, Mary Hogue, she is collecting signatures and trying to figure out how or if or when to start a Connecticut chapter. So if you're interested, look for her, chat with her. Our time has come. Our time has come. So now I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Linda Norris-Waldt. Linda is the Deputy Director and Advocacy and Chapters Director of the U.S. Composting Council. She has advocated for compost as healthy soil and carbon sequestering solution for organic waste for 10 years in that capacity. She has been in the recycling industry for over 30 years, having spent 10 of them as the Recycling Director for Frederick County in Maryland. She is the University of Maryland graduate, a member of the Maryland, Washington, D.C. Composting Council Board of Directors, and the Maryland Compost Advocacy Coalition. She is also part of the Frederick Compost Workgroup, a citizens advocacy group for composting and food waste in Frederick County, and she lives in Maryland. and she came up here to join us today. So please give her a round of applause. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad to be here in the room with so many composters, and we're in person here in Connecticut, which is fantastic. I'm really happy for you all to be all together. And I thank the folks from the Compost Alliance, the Connecticut Compost Alliance, and Mary and her folks who have been starting to bring people together here in terms of working with us at USCC. So I'm hoping that that's going to be a long-term relationship. So let me say that you heard I'm from Maryland, and I chose the theme that I chose today because I live in the central part of Maryland, which is not a place that has a lot of water. I have to go out to Annapolis and the Eastern Shore to see water, and I was so thrilled to come here and be staying in a part of Connecticut that is very water-laden so that I can just see the beauty of it here. And when you have water, you're going to have smooth, placid waters, but you're also going to have choppy waves and days like that. And my mission today, and what I was asked to talk to you about, is the national scope of what's going on in composting with a little bit of a focus on some of the choppy waters that we are navigating right now, such as PFAS. So that's what I'll be doing today, telling you the good places that we're at and how we're going to get through them so that we have a healthy soils future for our country. See if I did this right. Okay, I probably did the wrong one. Okay, there we go. So I will start out by telling you about the U.S. Composting Council in case you're not familiar. Our mission and our vision statement are up there, and we have been around since 1990 advocating for healthy soil and compost and its role in that. But what we've really seen in the last 10 years, as we all have seen, is a push towards recovery of food waste as part of that mission. And on top of that, as things have become more urgent with the climate emergency, the role that compost plays in climate. So that has really been the driver for a lot of the good stories you're going to be hearing in the next few slides. So who is in the U.S. Composting Council? We are primarily compost manufacturers. The people on the ground who are actually making the compost, producing the compost, whether they are private sector folks or municipal folks. And then we also have a large number of municipalities that are part of the community that have programs that may not be producing compost, but that are collecting it. And then you can see some of the other categories that make up large numbers of our members. So we really are representing a diverse tent of folks that are all pushing and rowing in the same direction for composting. I did want to recognize some of the folks who are here in Connecticut who are members. If you are a member, if you could just wave so people will see who are members in the audience. Or if you're also from outside of the state and you're a member. I realize as I'm here in New England that there is a lot of crossover. So if you are a member, why don't we just say stand up so that way people can see you more easily if anybody's on this list or is a member of USCC. Thank you very much. Now you know who to talk to, so. And I'm not here to sell membership, but if you are interested, I do have the link there for how you can become a member of USCC. So I'm going to start with the good times. It's always good to talk about the good news before you get into the challenges. In the last 10 years, when I first came to USCC, I would log on to Legiscan, which many of you might be using for bills. It's a good free way to find out what's going on by using a keyword. And I would come up with maybe 2, maybe some years 3 pages in the early years that had compost bills. But the last 3 years since I have been doing presentations like this, you can find more than 500 bills per year that have to do with compost in this country. They might be bills about compost use, about procurement of compost, about tax credits, grants, bills about compostable products, collection of compost, whether it be at colleges, whether it be at multifamily housing, whether it be at state facilities. These kinds of bills are coming up all over the place, and it is really amazing to see the push from the ground level to the legislators for more attention to compost. So that is a really encouraging measure of where we are at right now. Another interesting growth indicator, and that QR code, hopefully, I don't know if you can scan it from where you are, but we just finished a study that we did with the Environmental Research and Education Foundation, which does a lot of studies on tipping fees and waste issues. And what we found in that study, we got 300 responses back from about 2,000 people, compost facilities that we had reached out to. And we found that medium-scale composting, which is anywhere defined between 10,000 and 100,000 tons per year, is really on a huge growth trajectory. And that is a really good sign. Secondary to that is the small-size composting. So when you see things growing at those smaller levels, it is really an exciting indicator of what's coming in the next decade. I also wanted to include information on the collection side. Last summer, Biocycle magazine released their most recent study about access to organics recycling. And the access, as you can see, in those past couple of years has grown to 14.9 million households with access to some type of recycling collection, be it drop-off or curbside. So that is really an amazing trajectory that we're on in terms of the wish to see organics collected in our country. So it's really a pleasure. Another really important measure that people don't always know about, and it's really exciting for me to tell this story to people, is the money side of composting, between grants, private equity, and other types of financing. So on the federal side, since the Biden administration came in with the bipartisan infrastructure law and the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, there's been a huge influx of funding to composting. The program that most of us are familiar with, because it reaches into communities, is the CFWR, which is the Composting and Food Waste Reduction Grants, and those come through the USDA. And since 2020, there has been more than $12 million put into compost projects around the country. Another USDA program is the Climate Smart Agriculture Program, and what that does is aims to have crops that are produced in the U.S. produced through climate smart methods for the way that they are produced. And we have started to see, it took us some time to meet with USDA, but USDA has included the word composting in those grant languages. In past years, we were finding that compost was not considered a part of these grant programs out front, so people weren't applying for them, but now they are starting to put the word compost into them. So $104 million in climate smart agriculture programs. The third one, and the picture on the right with the sunrise there, is in Florida, and this came from the Fertilizer Production and Expansion Program. And that program came in during the early days of the Ukraine-Russian war, when people were worried about the production of fertilizer, since so much of it was going on in that area of the world. So what they did is they wanted more U.S. production of it, but with alternative methods and alternative people doing it. So what they did is they put a large program out there, $500 million, and they were looking for people in frontline communities and people with alternative methods to traditional fertilizer to produce fertile and soil amendment types of things. So we actually had compost programs like the new compost facility in Jacksonville, Florida that I've just mentioned, received grants for that, $15 million in grants from that program. And then we have the EPA. And last year, they put out the Swiffer grant, which maybe some of you are familiar with in your communities, and outreach and education grants for, both of these were for infrastructure and program development and for educating communities about composting. And you can see $46 million in composting programs in the Swiffer grant came out around the country, and the outreach and education program, $12.7 million. I mean, that is just incredible when we had no money being invested federally in composting before that. And the last one I wanted to mention to you is private sector funding, and ReFed had a catalytic grant that they put out, and right here in Connecticut, your Blue Earth Compost actually received one of those grants, so that was a really exciting thing, I'm sure, for you all here in Connecticut. And then nationally, there's a group called Zero Foodprint, and I'm not sure how many of you have heard of them, but they are run by a guy that was a James Beard award-winning chef. And he wanted to see the food that was coming into his restaurants coming from sustainable local sources. So he discovered compost, and he started a program where people could add $1 to their restaurant bill in several states around the country, and amassed a grant pool that now is giving money to farmers using compost on their crops that then he does business with in the restaurants. So this program, I emailed him last week, and they've done 252 projects in the last 3 years for $2.21 million. So that just floored me when I found that out. The other thing I wanted to mention about big changes that are happening in composting is private equity. There are several companies, and this really started happening in the last 5 years, that have bought and consolidated smaller companies that were funded by private equity. And some of them you might have heard of is Atlas Organics, which Generate Capital was the funding company behind that, and they bought facilities around the country. Denali Water bought We Care Composting. Some of you may know that because of this. They serve a lot of this area, and they have a facility in Connecticut. And they bought facilities across the country and have invested money in those. And the third one is Veranza Group, which has bought facilities in the Southeast. And what a lot of these companies are doing is buying up smaller yard waste facilities that have been run, just for trees, limbs, grass, and they've been converting them, some of them, to food waste facilities. So that is a really big change in the compost industry. It hasn't always been positive because since they are backed by private equity, sometimes they're shutting down some of the facilities that are actually not, in their eyes, profitable. And usually they're in areas where we're desperately trying to grow capacity. But in general, it's a really interesting trend for composting that we are growing up as an industry. So the other thing that we are having an impact in the industry is, I don't know how many of you are fans of Horton Hears a Who, but in Whoville, they said, we are here, we are here. That's how we felt when it comes to working with the federal agencies. As I mentioned with the grants, oftentimes we would hear about these grants, especially in NRCS, in USDA, which is a massive agency. We have learned that there are so many people that work there that they rarely talk to each other. And if you're from USDA, I apologize, because if you're at this level, you probably do. But what we found is when we started meeting with them, we said, why isn't compost part of this regenerative ag grant or, local rural development grant? Well, it is. Compost qualifies for that. And we said, well, you're listing out cover crops, you're listing out crop rotation, you're listing out other things that are known regenerative practices. Why don't you add compost? And they said, well, everybody knows compost is a regenerative practice. But what we've communicated to them is you need to put the word compost into these grants because otherwise people don't see themselves in them and they don't apply for them. So it's been a major crusade for us at USCC to do that. You've heard a little bit about the successes. They are starting to realize that we are here and we need to be part of these programs. I like to joke because I don't know if anyone remembers in 2021 when Biden did the first State of the Union speech, and he actually, in the speech, he said something like, he was talking about green jobs, and he said, I want to see the world, and farmers that are working with cover crops getting money for doing that. And I said, why isn't he saying compost? One day I'm going to have a president saying compost when he's up there in that State of the Union speech. So other things that I wanted to tell you about are some bills, which is a really new thing that we've been working on since 2019 and 2020. And the exciting thing is the Recycling and Composting Accountability Act, which is the one at the top. Tuesday night, it passed the Senate. So I have brand new breaking news for you. So very exciting. So what this bill does is, it was introduced by the Environment and Public Works Committee, through that committee, and what it would do is something we desperately need in the U.S., which is a collection of federal, national level data and study at the national level of both the composting and the recycling industries. These are very fragmented. If you're from a state agency or you work in the state sphere, you know that each state agency has its own way of collecting data. And it's really difficult to sort out how the different ways that people collect information about markets for recycling and composting, to plan for, what areas need more of these services, how do we, incentivize markets for these certain things. So that's the purpose of this bill, is to really look at this at a national level. And it is actually moving because it is a bipartisan bill. We have learned in the years that we've been working in Congress, which is relatively recently, that if you don't have Republicans and Democrats signed onto a bill, it's probably not going to go anywhere. So this one was actually put in by a Republican and a Democrat in Congress, and that means it had people signing onto it from both sides of the aisle. And I think that's why it's moving. There's a bill in the House also. Now it's going to be whether that bill moves forward on its own or whether this bill will be the vehicle to move forward. But it's just exciting, not only that we're compost, but that a bill actually went somewhere in Congress. It's an amazing feat. So the other bill I want to tell you about is the Compost Act. And this bill started in 2019 with Representative Julia Brownlee in California. And its original intent was to pay farmers for using compost in NRCS conservation practices. We went and met with her after she introduced it, and it now has a broader scope. It actually has an infrastructure building component to it. And what that does is, over a 10-year period, puts $200 million in grants and loans for both public and private sector for what we have seen is really missing in a lot of these grant programs, which is funding engineering, funding stone and paving, funding equipment, funding these really bedrock things that we need to start facilities. It's great to fund programs in education, but if you don't have the facilities to bring the materials to, it's money that's spent ahead of time. Unfortunately, this bill has been tagged as a partisan bill. We only have Democratic sponsors on it right now. We have been working our tails off to try to get Republican sponsors, trying to demonstrate to them the job capacity, the job building that is done when you have compost businesses in your state or in your country, in your congressional district. We've tried to explain to Republicans about green spin-off to other industries when you build a compost facility, not just the jobs at the facility, but the whole economic development piece that it provides for your community. Because generally, when we go in and talk to Republicans, and I'm sorry if someone's a Republican here, I don't mean to be partisan, but we generally are finding that if it costs money and if we're talking about climate, it just isn't catching their attention. So we are working really hard. We've tried to get this bill into the Farm Bill as an earmark, but we're having the same problem there. It's new money, and Republicans generally don't want to put new money into the Farm Bill. So we're going to keep working on this Compost Act and hope that it goes somewhere pretty soon, or find another vehicle for more infrastructure building. The other thing two more things I wanted to mention about the whole We Are Here concept is the fact that we are now meeting the U.S. Composting Council with the EPA on a quarterly basis. We have a great dialogue with them. We've also met with many USDA folks, as I mentioned. And one good example of this, how many of you have used the WARM model, either in your composting business or as a community advocate? Do you know what the WARM model is? Which is the way you measure landfilling versus composting versus AD. You plug in numbers and it will tell you, what is, based on your numbers that you plug in, what is good for your community. Well, we've always felt that composting was getting the short end of the stick on that WARM model. If you've ever looked at it, it doesn't well account for carbon sequestration of compost, et cetera. So we really wanted to comment on it. Well, our conference was right at the date when the comments were due. And we had reached out to experts like Sally Brown, who's going to be speaking to you all later, to say, can you help us? We need your expertise for this. And everyone came back to us and said, we're getting ready for the conference presentation. We don't have time. So what we did is we went back to EPA and we said, we need more time. This is really important to the compost industry. They gave us until this Friday, March 15th. They extended the deadline, and they told us in our EPA meeting the other day that since they extended it, they've had 900 comments on WARM as opposed to 100 comments that they had received before. So it's really important for us to develop these relationships. And the last measure that I'll tell you for USCC in terms of seeing growth is our own internal metrics. We have, in the last 10 years, seen a 25% growth in our membership in the US, which has really been exciting for us and enabled us to build more programs for composters around the country. Our foundation does a program called the Compost Operations Training Course, and that's a 5-day-long course that they run several times a year throughout the country. For the last 2 or 3 years, those have been selling out. So if you hear about one and you want to go, sign up the first time you hear about it, because it's hard to get into those courses now. Our conferences, we just finished our conference in Florida, and we hit 1,600 people at that conference. When I came, we were only getting like between 800 and 700 people. So our conferences are turning into a massive event that now we have to get a convention center to hold the conferences. We've also grown from 4 chapters about 6 years ago to 15 now, and maybe Connecticut will become one of our next chapters. And you can see on that map the states where we have chapters now. So that's another big measure of the interest in composting at the ground level, which is so important. And lastly, I have a picture of a loader there just to remind me to tell you that in 2020, those of you who are composters know this, composters, that first year of COVID, everyone wanted to go home and work in their garden or stay home and work in their garden. And our composters sold out within 2 months in the spring of all of their compost. It was the best year any composters have had. And so coming behind that, we started to see equipment manufacturers and equipment brokers. The sales market for equipment for composting has gone crazy, and now there are wait lists for getting equipment for your compost facility. So all of those things are metrics that just tell you how great our industry is, what we're up to right now, and all the hope that we have for composting in the US. But there are the speed bumps and there are the challenges, and those are going to come whether you're having smooth sailing or not. So we have to find ways to manage those speed bumps and make sure, if we are truly resilient, that we use science and we use good explanation of the benefits of compost to deal with these. So I'm going to especially spend a lot of time on PFAS, since that was the request, and I'm going to talk a little bit about microplastics, contamination, and consumer education and misalignment. So I know that here in New England, this has been the kind of the ground zero for regulation and legislation on PFAS, but I thought it wouldn't hurt just to quickly run through and refresh everyone, what PFAS chemicals are. And these are the chemicals that are known for their reason they came into being back in the 50s, 60s was because of their water and stain repellent properties, their flame retardant properties, but unfortunately they're persistent. They do not easily break down. They travel throughout the system, so it's hard to find a way to mitigate them. And because of this ubiquity of PFAS, they've even been found in soils and water in the North Pole. So that just goes to show you how ubiquitous and difficult this is. And we do have a lot of materials at this link if you want to see more materials about PFAS. And food products is where a lot of the problems are coming for us in composting. They are actually coming in not only through packaging, which you see up there, packaging of cake, cake mixes you've probably heard about by now, but they're even coming in our food. So it's really difficult to get away from these until we start banning PFAS chemicals in this country. So how do we get PFAS in the US, or in the US composting industry, excuse me? Well, it's coming through several methods. The picture on the left is a biosolids compost. And biosolids compost, unfortunately, as long as we are humans, we're going to need water treatment, wastewater treatment plants, and something has to be done with the waste that comes from those plants, those water treatment plants, and much of it goes into biosolids, which is then composted. So that is one way that we are receiving PFAS in our own feedstocks. The other way, the other two pictures show you food waste compost, both with packaging and without. It's coming in straight with the food. It's coming in through the packaging. But the other things that people don't always realize is that PFAS is coming through contact water on the compost pile when it rains. It may be coming into groundwater from other sources around the compost facility that the compost facility may have nothing to do with. And it's actually coming in through the air. So there are many ways that PFAS is finding its way into our compost piles. So the really important thing about PFAS is to be sure we use science to figure out how to solve this problem. And right now, many states are waiting for something called the health risk assessment that EPA is doing as a part of their PFAS strategic roadmap. And what this is doing is looking at the actual health impacts of PFAS in biosolids, in the various pathways that it comes to humans. And this is supposed to be finished this year, and I believe some part of it is in peer review right now. But when that comes out, it will give composters and biosolids producers a much more realistic picture of what we're facing. Right now, we don't understand, or we don't have enough science to understand what are safe levels of PFAS in soil, in compost. And that's been one of our big problems. Some states have accepted 50 parts per billion as a place where you better start watching. When you get higher than that, they're very concerned, but that still is not completely scientifically based. But a lot of states are waiting for this EPA assessment before going lower than that. Unfortunately, we have states in the Northeast who have decided, in the overabundance of caution, in our opinion, to completely disallow this. So hopefully this EPA assessment will allow them to open the doors back up again once it comes out. But we do have to have science-based regulations so that we can all make informed decisions about what to do, both in compost and for our bodies. So on your tables, you have some cards that I put out, and that is up here on the screen. And these cards were produced. We did these for the USCC. Actually, Andrew, who just came in and is in the audience, helped us with this project. He is on our PFAS task force. But what these do is look at various products so that composters have a tool when they're talking to customers, when they're talking to their neighbors in the grocery store, when they're talking to their family at the Thanksgiving table, and people say, "Oh, I heard compost is bringing all kinds of PFAS. Why are you in the compost business?" Well, take a look at those cards, and you will see that things like popcorn bags are at 6 to 290 PFOA, and if you look at compost containing food waste, we're at 4.7, 1.7 on those two different chemicals. Compost without food waste, 0.3, 1.9. Ladies, look at the cosmetics and think about your cosmetics and look at the incredible amount of PFOA in your cosmetics. I tell you, I have given up on, I have given up on waterproof mascara, I will tell you that. So this is a good tool to use to help people to see what we're really facing when it comes to PFAS in compost versus PFAS in other things. The other thing I would mention is the blood serum levels. There's two different measures there, and you can see how the blood serum levels decline in both chemicals, actually, because PFOS, FDA secured a voluntary ban of using PFOS back in the mid-20-teens, and that really drove down the amount of PFOS in the bloodstream. And what that tells us is that bans are effective. Stopping using these chemicals, which common sense tells you anyway, is effective. And we think that's one of the things we really have to be doing in the compost industry, is pushing for these bans. I have a couple of case studies that I brought for you just to, You may already know of the situations, but just to give you a perspective, Mass Natural in Massachusetts, they were a family business that had been around for quite a while. They began taking sludge from a paper facility, a paper-making facility right near them. That facility was making packaging, and they found high levels of PFAS in the groundwater around them. And being the small family business, they have actually gone bankrupt because of the impacts of this. Seaman Paper, to my knowledge, still has not acknowledged that they have any culpability in this. But the other disturbing thing in this situation is they had no baseline levels for how much PFAS was in the soil. So that's a really important thing for us to know, is baseline, what's in the soil before we even start to talk about what compost or biosolids have brought to the soil. The next one I wanted to highlight for you is actually on the other side of the country in Arizona. Pima County, Arizona was, they had put a stop, a stop on land spreading of biosolids, and not biosolids, compost in this case, but it was biosolids. And they got a guy from the University of Arizona to take a look and do some experiments where the biosolids had been spread, and in places out in the desert where there was no spreading of biosolids or anything at all going on. And they found that the levels of PFAS in those two locations were very similar. So and they also found that the PFAS was not going down into the groundwater, which everyone had assumed. So what this guy is now doing is he started a fund where he is testing biosolids all around the country to see if this data can be proven out. But long story short, Pima County reversed their their ban on biosolids spreading. Another one I want to mention, and it was alluded to in the last slide, is the cost of biosolids if we aren't able to compost them. The city of Kennebunkport was selling Class A biosolids for $5 a ton because they heard the publicity about, or it might have been before, actually, I'm not sure about that. But they discontinued, and they started trucking their biosolids to the nearest available place that they could take them to, which was a hazardous waste facility. So you can see the difference in the cost that they have to pay now to dispose of those biosolids. And they also had to put in a centrifuge to de-water the biosolids because they were transporting them so far. So this has become a huge cost, and the city of Kennebunkport has actually testified in several of our hearings about PFAS to talk about that. So the thing about biosolids to remember is that the benefits outweigh the risks when it comes to compost. If you think about the cards that we just talked about, and you think about the fact that compost has proven to be the most environmentally sound way of handling biosolids. Incineration and landfilling are both less desirable methods, so if we take away our ability to compost biosolids, we have to trade off for an environmentally less beneficial way of handling them. So we really have to bring all these pieces together when we make these policy decisions. The last one that I wanted to tell you about was something that happened to us at USCC, one of our members who was in the Midwest. And this member called up and told us that his customer, who had had her yard treated or spread with compost in the spring, she read the Boston Globe article, became concerned about PFAS, hired an engineer who wasn't even specialized in this field to come and test the compost, send it off for testing, and had called the composter and said, I want you to come pick all this compost up off of my yard because I found it was a very small amount, 0.68 PFOS and 0.39 PFOA. So if you remember that earlier chart, those are incredibly small amounts. But she still insisted on doing that. It was troubling because there was no baseline testing of what her soil had in it before that, so we don't even know what the level of PFAS was before the compost was put in. And also, there's no telling if the test contaminated the compost, because when you test for PFAS, you could have PFAS on your pens, on your clothing, on your clipboards. So another part of our a side note is another part of our PFAS toolkit that we have for members is a whole document about the proper way to test for PFAS to be sure you get good results in terms of credible results. So another speed bump for us in the compost industry has been federal regulations. The federal government decided to pursue people who are producing PFAS with CERCLA, which is Superfund. And we are very concerned that composters will get pulled into this if situations like mass natural occur, that we will be held liable in the sense of a Superfund cleanup, which we do not, number one, ask for PFAS. We don't want PFAS. If we could, we would take it out of our stuff or treat it. There isn't a way to do that yet, but we are called passive receivers for that reason. The other thing is, in CERCLA, Superfund was designed to make the polluters, the generators of chemicals that pollute, pay. So if you go with that philosophy I just mentioned, we are not the polluters. We are only the side victims of this material coming in. The third thing you should be aware of is we've heard on Capitol Hill some people who have said, well, don't worry, they're not going to prosecute composters. You're not who they're really coming after. Well, just having someone say that isn't really a good way to feel comfortable with what kind of liability you may have. So, and we actually have found a few cases, especially at the state level of enforcement for Superfund, where composters have been pulled into other actions. So we have been pushing for an exemption from this CERCLA liability with both bills and with trying to get worded into other bills, like an EPW bill that's going to be talked about next week on the 20th. So stay tuned. That is another area we're working really hard on to try to mitigate this problem. So when we have these speed bumps, what can we do? And I wanted to try to, from all the work that we've done in this, if you are a composter or an ally of composting in the room, some of the things you can do is take a look at what you've been accepting in terms of feedstock so that you're aware. If you've been taking in some kind of industrial product and composting it, like the paper sludge, be aware of it and start to investigate what that impact that might have for you. Another thing is, if you're going to test, which some states are actually starting to require testing, if you're going to test, be prepared, because tests can become public, and you need to think about, before you start testing, what are you going to do with the results that you get? If you find that you have more PFAS than some of these limits that you've heard about, how are you going to talk about that? What are you going to do to mitigate it? And be prepared for the answer before you go ask the question. Use USCC resources. I mentioned a lot of these. We have a lot of webinars on this. Some are open to all, some are for members, but there is a lot on the website that you can use. And the other thing is, prepare your customers, prepare your staff, your sales staff. Have your own personal message that you want to use when people, do come to you with a problem. Talk about that. Advocates, very similar. Watch letters to the editor and things that you may be able to respond on behalf of the compost industry for. Definitely talk about the benefits of compost. So those are some things you can do. I'm going to whiz through some of these slides because I'm running out of time. Microplastics, the long and short of that is that there is a lot of research being done on this, but even one of the key researchers, Eric Roy, has said we still have a lot of work to do to have a really definitive answer on what levels of microplastics are too much. So keep an eye on that. Contamination. We all know that people, when they have picnics and things, they want to have compostable alternatives as well as recyclable alternatives. But we find ourselves, especially as consumers, standing in the store trying to sort out what does biodegradable mean? What does plant-friendly mean? Well, what we've worked on at USCC and some of these states all these states that you see at the top all have labeling legislation of various types now, requiring different things. USCC had a task force of composters and compostable manufacturing, compostable products people, and we came to a conclusion on what we felt needed to be in the legislation, which includes third-party certification based on ASTM. Field testing is encouraged, as well as lab testing through BPI. There is a scheme, which you can see on this, on our labeling principles on this QR code, for how to color various products that are compostable so that consumers can recognize them. And the biggest thing is lookalikes are the things that are killing composters. These things that you saw on the last slide where we're all innocently buying things and putting them in our compost bins that we think are compostable, but they're not. So what we put in these bills is that these legislators have to make the states responsible for enforcing greenwashing and getting rid of products that do not meet the labeling guidelines. So the other thing that's happening that I'll just run through quickly is there are several EPR, extended producer responsibility bills out there that put onto the producers a fee that will then come back to the community to help to fund composting and recycling programs. Most of these are coming in without composting in them. In the first few years, Oregon and Maine didn't cover composting, even though they're charging compostable products manufacturers money for their products. We've been contending that compost needs to be a beneficiary of this funding. We've been working on this in a lot of bills. They do needs assessments, and we want to be sure organics is considered in the needs assessments. We want to be sure composting and compostable products have a seat on the advisory committees in these EPR bills. And I'll skip over the rest of that. A couple things we're working on. There is a zoning template. USCC has found that most communities, even if your state permitting is good, most communities don't have zoning for composting. So we have a template can be dropped right into city and county codes to include composting. In Vermont, they had a source separation policy they had to put in because when AD and depackaging came in a big way, the composters started losing their contracts because the depackaging could take everything, including packaging and materials that had food still in it, and more food was going to the landfill after the depackaging came in than went into the landfill before. So Vermont put in a requirement that now groceries have to source separate before they send stuff, whether it's for AD or for composting. So that we're seeing a trend towards that around the country. Electric composters, we're working on that. I'm sure you've all seen them on Amazon. They say they're producing compost, but they don't. We're working on some things to take care of that. And a lot of communities in the Northeast are calling things composting that are not composting, like New York sending, they had their smart bins, and the smart bins actually are going to AD facilities where the compost is not being, the digestate is not being composted. So we're trying to teach the media and teach municipalities to use the right words. If it's not composting, don't call it composting. That's a QR code for our Action Center where we have a lot of bills. You can sign on to there and say, I want to see bans on all consumer products for PFAS, for example. So visit that if you get a chance. We're constantly putting out new campaigns on there that you can take a look at. And just remember, we're all here about the compost. Even with all of these speed bumps, the reason we're here is because compost has climate benefits, water benefits, pesticide, fertilizer, less fertilizer, so many good things we can do. We have to stay focused on the good things, navigate these speed bumps, but continue pushing forward on the positives. And with that, I thank you. That is my overview, and I'm open for however much time is left. No time for questions. Okay.